Final Fantasy Tactics came out in 1997, and everyone started chasing after it. This isn't really a complaint. It set such a specific and excellent standard back then that imitating it makes obvious sense. But what's interesting is how differently each game in this space handled the comparison. This video covers games that all exist somewhere in the shadow of Final Fantasy Tactics. What each one borrows, where each one goes, and which ones actually deserve to be played right now. Tactics Ogre the Knight of Lotus is the last game Quest Corporation ever made. After completing it in 2001, the company was absorbed by Square and became Square Product Development Division 4, whose first project was Final Fantasy Tactics Advance on the same GBA hardware a year later. That makes Knight of Lotus a fascinating transitional artifact, Quest's final statement, right before becoming the team that made FFDA. As a prequel set 23 years before Let Us Cling Together, it follows Alphonse Lower, a young Lotus Knight sent to the occupied island of Ovis who gradually turns against his empire. The story is more intimate than the main game's multi-faction political warfare. A mid-game branching choice significantly alters what follows, and 5 endings exist. Matsuno didn't write it, and the scope scales down accordingly, but the moral weight carries through. The emblem system is Knight of Lotus's real contribution. Emblems are certificates earned by performing specific feats in battle. Dodge 3 attacks in a row, kill 5 dragons, survive 15 counterattacks, win a fight with only 2 characters, and they gain advanced class promotions. Want to become a Dragoon? Earn the Dragon Scale emblem by killing dragons first. Want to unlock Swordmaster? Dodge 3 consecutive attacks in a single fight. Class advancement is tied to how you play rather than purely to stats, meaning a unit that takes risks and survives builds differently from one you protect all game. Some emblems carry negative effects. Some are mutually exclusive. The system creates emergent differentiation across a run, and nothing in the tactic genre has quite replicated it since, which is the main reason this game has aged better than its low profile suggests. Onimusha Tactics landed on the Game Boy Advance in 2003 and tried to bring the PS2 series into the tactic genre without quite having the depth to support the ambition. The feudal Japan setting is genuinely appealing. Demon Hunter Onimura battling Nobunaga Oda's Gunma forces across isometric battlefields, with a stone transmutation crafting system that replaces shops entirely. You collect Gunma stones from defeated enemies, find recipes, and combine them into weapons and armor. Souls from kills enhance equipment further. The Isen Counter Move, a defensive technique that can instantly kill an attacking enemy when it randomly activates, adds a useful and distinctive wildcard. For a GBA cartridge with tight resource constraints, these are smart design solutions. What lacks is depth. The class system is essentially non-existent. Characters have defined roles with no job switching or ability inheritance, and the game was clearly built for genre newcomers rather than veterans. Anyone who's touched FFT, Tactics Ogre, or Fire Emblem will find very little here that taxes them. The Phantom Realm grinding area is so repetitive that the game seems vaguely apologetic about its existence. There's no branching, no meaningful story choices, no secondary cast worth investing in significantly. The production values are solid for a GBA game, and the aesthetic of demons and robots in feudal Japan is exactly as surreal as it sounds. As an introduction to the genre for younger players or Onimusha fans with no tactics experience, it works well enough. As anything else, the gap between what the concept promises and what the mechanics deliver is the whole story. Final Fantasy Tactics 2 fixed most of what players complained about in FFTA and never quite got the credit it deserved, partly because it arrived in 2007 as the DS was winding down, and partly because it couldn't escape the shadow of a game that was already in that shadow. The law system was overhauled. Breaking a law no longer jails your unit. It strips your battle rewards instead. Mission variety expanded significantly beyond defeat all enemies, with objectives including monster hunts, escort missions, and time clears. The class roster grew. Animations and presentation improved noticeably. A real-time auction house in the hub city added economic texture the first game lacked entirely. The mechanical depth is arguably the highest of any game in the Ivalice Tactics line. What it didn't fix was the story. Protagonist Lusso is a blank replacement for Marche without Marche's emotional specificity, and the 400 quests never accumulate into anything with real stakes. The game stays light throughout and doesn't apologize for it. For players who want tactics as a pure job system playground with no difficult narrative to navigate, this may be the best entry point on this entire list, the corrected, expanded version of an already deep system. For everyone else, the absence of story weight announces itself fairly early and keeps announcing itself. There's an exceptional engine running here, searching for something meaningful to power it, which is a genuine limitation in a genre where the best entries make the battles feel like they cost something beyond time and items. Still worth the time if you can make peace with that. La Pucelle Tactics is the game NIS made in 2002, the year before Disgaea changed everything for them, and it sits in an interesting middle position, mechanically more serious than it but built by the same team. Demon hunting, siblings prior, and culotte work for a church with French food puns for every character name. And the combat is built around dark portals scattered across each battlefield that release directional streams of dark energy. Route those streams through enough enemies and a miracle triggers. A devastating event that rewards the setup time invested and can completely clear maps when properly chained. Nothing else in the genre uses this system, and it gives La Pucelle a genuine tactical identity separate from anything else NIS made before or after. Enemies can be purified and converted into temporary allies or crafting components. Story branches based on hidden conversation triggers, and multiple endings reward replaying chapters with different approaches. The writing is sharper with more genuine emotional investment under the comedy. Prior in particular is one of the better protagonists in the NIS catalog, genuinely funny without feeling hollow. The Western release was heavily censored. Crosses removed from character designs, religious terminology altered throughout, a character's cigarette sprite removed while his walking animation still plays the motion. These choices feel dated at this distance, and the game survived them anyway. La Pucelle is both Disgaea's direct predecessor and a better version of the NIS early style for players who want the house aesthetic with real mechanical depth underneath the humor. Tactics Ogre actually came before FFT, not after. It was made by the same director, Yasumi Matsuno, who left Quest Corporation specifically after completing this game to join Square. The connection is direct. FFT is essentially him applying everything he learned here to a new IP with better production resources. What this does that FFT doesn't is give you meaningful moral choices that branch the story into completely different paths. 3 routes that diverge based on whether you follow orders or refuse them, and multiple characters live or die depending on those decisions. Up to 8 ending variations exist. The story is explicitly modeled on the ethnic conflicts of the Balkans and Yugoslavia. In 1995, on a Super Famicom, this level of political weight in a strategy game was genuinely unprecedented. The PSP 2010 remake added Chariot, rewind up to 50 turns in any battle, and the world system, letting you revisit story branch points without replaying the entire game. The class system was reworked to be more modular, and the narrative was expanded with new scenes and characters. The 2022 Reborn Remaster refined it further. Some players find the hit rates punishing, and the AI aggressively targets your weakest unit in ways that feel more unfair than strategic at times. The difficulty occasionally tips from earned to arbitrary. But as a narrative tactical RPG, one that treats the genre as a vehicle for political drama rather than adventure fantasy, nothing else in this space has matched it. If you want to understand where FFT came from and what it was responding to, this is the origin. Mercenary Saga Chronicles is 3 games in one package for $15, and that is the entire honest pitch. Developed by Rideon for mobile platforms and ported to the 3DS before arriving on Switch in 2018 with updated visuals, the collection delivers 50 to 70 hours of tactics gameplay across 3 separate mercenary stories, each following the same template of a small unit getting pulled into a political conflict that turns out to be bigger than the contract. The stories are generic. The characters are underdeveloped throughout. The production clearly reflects the mobile origins. What the games deliver is the tactical loop in reliable, unadorned form. 2 mechanics separate it slightly from the average FFT clone. First, the MP system. Characters don't start battles with full magic points, gaining mana turn by turn instead, which makes resource management for healers and mages genuinely strategic across long engagements rather than a pure spend-down problem. Second, the visible hate stat. Aggro tracking showing exactly how likely enemies are to target each unit is an unusual transparency choice that rewards deliberate positioning without hiding the logic behind the AI. The class advancement system branches at levels 10 and 20 with 2 choices at each split, giving builds enough texture to feel considered. None of this is revolutionary. All of it is competently implemented and honestly presented. This is a diet version of the genre made by developers who understood exactly what they were producing at a price that makes arguing against it genuinely difficult. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance spent years being dismissed as FFT for kids, which misses what the game actually is: a completely different design philosophy built on familiar bones. The original FFT told a specific tragic story with a fixed cast. FFTA is a clan-building sandbox with 5 playable races, each locked to unique job trees, and a progression system where abilities are learned from equipped gear rather than spent job points. Skills carry over between classes once mastered. You can build a human who casts white magic because they wore a staff in a previous class. The combination space is enormous, and the game sold over 1.5 million copies worldwide in its first year on the GBA. The law system, where judges enforcing per-battle restrictions that ban certain actions, is the most contested design choice. Breaking a law, cards, or unit. Repeat violations mean imprisonment and potentially losing characters for stretches. The design intent was to force creative approaches to each fight rather than using the same formation every time. In practice, early game laws frustrate before they become interesting, and the jail mechanic can stall progression badly if you're unlucky in the first several hours. The story: real-world kids transported into an Ivalice built from their dreams, is genuinely lighter than FFT's political tragedy, which bothered purists. What nobody can argue is the sheer volume of content. 300 missions, a massive job system, and enough to absorb 80 hours. It's a different kind of achievement than its predecessor, built for portable play and completely succeeding on those terms.
It's my turn!
Luminous Arc came to the DS in 2007 from developer Image Epic with a Yasunori Mitsuda soundtrack and a genuine design goal of making the tactics genre accessible to players who found it intimidating. The result is competent and honest about what it is. Accessible grid combat with a flash drive gauge that fills through battle actions and releases limit break attacks unique to each character. A story about young soldiers who start fighting for a corrupt church and end up allying with the witches they were hunting, and online multiplayer through Nintendo Wi-Fi. The DS dual-screen layout puts turn order and character data on the bottom screen, while the battlefield runs on top. A genuinely smart use of the hardware that most tactics games on the platform didn't attempt. The soundtrack is excellent and still underrated. One mechanical wrinkle: leveling up mid-battle fully restores health, which creates tactical gambles about when to expose vulnerable units near their XP threshold. Whether this produces interesting choices or cheapens tension is individual, but it does differentiate the system from standard FFT clones. Character customization is otherwise thin. The story follows predictable patterns without subverting them, and the writing doesn't have the energy to elevate fairly conventional beats. Stylus controls are consistently worse than D-pad. It sits in this solid genre entry for players who want something undemanding and complete tier, filling that tier reliably. The Mitsuda soundtrack alone makes it worth finding, even if everything surrounding it never quite justifies the composer they managed to hire.
God bless us!
Hoshigami Ruining Blue Earth came out in 2001 for the PS1, developed by Max 5, a team with FFT veterans among them, and looks so similar to its inspiration that every contemporary review opened by noting it. The brown diagonal fade when entering battle, the sprite style, the isometric grid. It was clearly built to fill the FFT-shaped absence in players' libraries, an understandable commercial instinct that mostly failed critically but still has an audience willing to defend it. The Kohen Fame system, magic gems engraved with spells, customizable and levelable, is genuinely original and gives the game a real identity separate from its obvious inspiration. The problem is the backstab damage modifier. Attacking from behind can deal 100 times normal damage, which means a single poorly positioned unit gets erased by mechanics that weren't properly communicated up front. Permadeath applies, and the cycle of building characters over hours only to lose them to surprise engagements produces frustration rather than tension. The class system has no job switching at all. Characters worship one of 6 gods, locking weapon type and elemental alignment permanently. The music barely cycles through 2 battle themes across the entire runtime. A DS remake called Hoshigami Remix tried to address some of these issues and remained notoriously difficult to recommend. It stands as the most direct FFT clone that undermined itself. A game with a real foundation that turned difficulty into punishment and never found the balance between challenge and engagement that makes this genre worth returning to. Arcadian Atlas spent 7 years getting from its 2016 Kickstarter to its 2023 Steam release. And the result is what happens when developers love Final Fantasy Tactics so sincerely that the game almost becomes tribute rather than its own thing. The isometric grid, the sprite style, the dynastic civil war framing, all of it consciously channels the source. The story, explicitly Hamlet-inspired, opens with you drawing a royalist army into a forest and burning it down, and the political double-crosses come quickly and with genuine sharpness. What Twin Otter added that FFT doesn't have? A jazz soundtrack by Moritz PG Cats that is genuinely extraordinary. Saxophones and guitars where the genre expects dramatic horns, immediately distinctive, still playing in the head days after finishing. Mechanically, the depth doesn't fully match the ambition. Classes can't cross-pollinate abilities between jobs. Combat favors ranged units heavily enough that unit diversity suffers. The battlefield is fully 2D without the rotatable 3D diorama that made FFT's maps spatially readable in ways this game can't replicate. A 3-turn death timer instead of instant permadeath is a welcome accessibility choice. The party levels together system eliminates the neglected character problem. The 10 to 20 hour runtime moves fast enough that emotional stakes don't always have time to settle before the next revelation. For people who have been waiting 20 years for something to fill the FFT gap, this is filling and worth the time. It just doesn't replace what it's chasing, and the developers would probably be the first to admit it. Makai Kingdom is the game where NIS put the protagonist inside the rulebook. Lord Zeta, the most powerful overlord in the universe by his own assessment, destroys his own netherworld by setting fire to the sacred tome, the book that controls reality, in a fit of wounded pride. He merges with it to survive. The whole game is Zeta as a book, trying to reconstruct his domain by convincing other overlords to write in his pages and make those inscriptions real. He cannot fight directly. No main story characters are initially playable. Your army is created from scratch and summoned into battle through facilities, buildings called onto the map that serve simultaneously as spawn points, stat boosters, and tactical anchors. That facility system is Makai Kingdom's structural contribution to the genre, and it's the main reason to play it. Buildings on the battlefield housing troops, providing bonuses, and vulnerable to capture or destruction creates a different tactical texture than anything else in the NIS lineup. Combined with free movement rather than grid squares, and battlefield extensions that unlock by destroying specific objects mid-battle, fights develop in ways that aren't possible in the more rigid formats. The game was reportedly rushed, and it shows in places. The AI makes erratic decisions, the sprites run smaller, and the music improved over predecessors but doesn't reach any memorable peaks. Zeta's repeated self-proclamations grate over the runtime. But the structural ideas are genuinely interesting, and nothing in their works that followed ever fully developed what Makai Kingdom introduced.
Supposed to submit to you just because you're older?
Sayuki Journey West is a PS1 tactical RPG released in Japan in 1999 and arriving in North America in 2001 to basically no fanfare, despite being genuinely worth playing. It adapts the 16th century Chinese novel journey to the West. Monk Jinzhou traveling to India with 3 monster companions to retrieve Buddhist scriptures, with care for the source material that most licensed games skip entirely. The translation is thoughtful. The character dynamics are warm and frequently funny, and the demi-human guardians each carry enough personality that the episodic story structure works better than it has any right to. What separates it from FFT mechanically is the Wurbeast transformation system. Each of Jinzhou's companions can transform into a more powerful animal form mid-battle, like Son Goku can turn into a great ape, and classical Chinese elemental affinity shape which opponents each character handles best. The battles sit on the easier side compared to FFT's demanding difficulty curve, and the encounter scale is smaller, which suits the road trip rhythm of the source novel. The main weakness is pacing. The game runs longer than its content density supports, and the final stretch drags noticeably. But as a tactics game built around non-European mythology, with a party of characters who genuinely bicker and grow on each other over the journey, nothing else in the genre quite resembles it. It got overlooked in 2001, stayed overlooked, and keeps getting passed over even in retrospectives about the PS1 tactics era. That's the main reason it belongs on this list. Disgaea Hour of Darkness in 2003 looked at the tactical RPG format and decided the correct response was to make everything go to level 9999. Demon Prince Laharl, woken from a 2-year nap to find his father dead and his throne contested, teams up with the hapless Angel Flan who was sent to assassinate him, and decided friendship was more interesting. The tone is deliberately absurdist. Prinnies are penguin suits filled with the souls of sinners who explode when thrown. The cast debates the nature of evil between meals, and the writing is genuinely funny, which is something tactical RPGs almost never manage to pull off convincingly. Mechanically, this introduced geo panels, colored squares with effect nodes that chain together when destroyed, potentially clearing entire maps if the setup pays off. Characters stack into towers and throw each other across the battlefield. Stacking 2 characters who then attack the same enemy triggers a combo. The item world is an infinite dungeon inside any item that levels equipment past any theoretical cap. The Dark Assembly lets you pass proposals, including bribing demon senators with stolen goods to unlock content. The main story ends around level 50. The real endgame begins at level 1000 and technically never ends. IGN gave it Best Game No One Played in 2003, which the decade of sequels that followed confirms was accurate and bittersweet in equal measure. Start here if you've never played a Disgaea game. The characters and writing are the best the franchise produced, and the systems are deep enough to absorb whatever you're willing to give.